welcome back to my channel. This is a Survivor's Guide to Life. My name is Jessica Lang and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist who talks to you about all things related to trauma, the brain, attachment, and healing. So if that's your jam, click that subscribe button down below so you can be notified every time I upload a new video. And while you're at it, why don't you hop on over to Instagram where you can follow me there, where every day I post more tips and tricks, inspirational quotes, things about my life, to just kind of get you through the day if you are struggling. So for today's topic, I am talking about the Netflix series When They See Us. So I watched parts 1 and 2, or should I say episodes 1 and 2 first, and so that's what this video here is going to be about. It's just going to be me reviewing and making commentary on the series and relating it to trauma and obviously the brain and healing, because that's what this channel is about, making a specific focus for today's video on like multi-generational trauma as well as attachment. And then I'll do a part 2 of this video where I review the last 2 episodes. Okay, so just so you know, this is only the first 2 episodes, and then I'm going to do a subsequent video about the last 2 episodes, so stay tuned for that. So a brief synopsis of what When They See Us is about. It has to do with the Central Park 5. So this was a case that happened in New York, obviously New York Central Park, back in 1989, where 5 black youths were arrested, charged, and found guilty of sexually assaulting a white woman who was jogging in the park one evening. So the first 2 episodes chronicled the youth's arrest as well as their trial. So that's what I'm going to talk about now, because I know that most people, like, that was the hardest part for them to get through, and I know for myself watching it, that was definitely the hardest part for me to get through, was watching the police interrogate these young boys and looking at them crying, shaking, shivering, like looking terrified, and knowing what I know about obviously trauma, obviously brain development. They were, you know, between 14 and 16 years old. And if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you will have heard me say that the brain does not even stop developing. That critical frontal cortex, right, the piece that actually controls one's impulses, like, that is not fully developed until a person is 25, typically for females, 26 typically for males. So these are young people. And to note that, you know, the brain develops the fastest time during that first 5 years, but it goes through like another huge burst of development during the adolescent years. So you'll see typically adolescents kind of doing some regression, or, you know, struggling because they're in that phase of, like, you know, launching to the next stage of adulthood, while also like leaving their childhood kind of behind. And so you'll see some regression. One day they seem, you know, like a typical 16-year-old, 15-year-old, and then the next they're like acting like a 2-year-old, and they, you know, want you to rock them or whatever. And I'm not even being funny. Anyone who knows teenagers knows that they go back, they vacillate in between kind of mature behaviors and immature behaviors. So as the video just got started, for me, one of the things I quickly noticed was sort of like the thoughts that I had just within the first couple minutes of watching the video. So the scene busts out with, you know, youths like out in the street. They've got a radio going, and, you know, it's literally a group of black youths out on the street. And my first thought was like, well, what are these kids doing out in the street in the middle of the night? And I thought to myself, this is probably a thought that most people have, right? Like, what are these kids doing? So, like, I explored that thought further, and I'm like, why am I thinking that? Why is my first thought, like, what are these group of kids, like, doing out on the street? Like, questioning them as if they're presumed to be guilty. And at first I was like, is that, you know, have I, like, internalized racism and wondering, oh, like, they're up to no good. Like, what are these black kids doing? When I was like, well, you know, I think some people might have that thought, but, like, as a black woman who kind of knows how this system is, my thought was more like, oh, great, like, you're out, it's a group of you, you're going to be targeted. It was more from, like, that perspective. And these are, like, not even my children. I don't know these boys. And it's also, you know, it's a movie based off of something that really happened, but, like, I had a visceral reaction to watching these boys out at night. And I'm like, oh, God, there's going to be, and it's a group of y'all, oh, man, it's about to be some trouble. And, like, this got me thinking a lot. And I also had written a blog just today, so check that out down below, where I was talking about the link between, like, multi-generational trauma and attachment, and how Dr. Joy Degruy, like, she coined, you know, post-traumatic slave syndrome. And again, you can check that out in the description box where she talks about this more deeply, how many African Americans, black folks, whatever phrase you want to use, we come from a legacy of slavery, and that a lot of the behaviors and things that we exhibit that we think are like culture actually come from these old unhealed wounds of trauma from being enslaved, and time with Jim Crow, and being racially like in institutionalized racism and all of that stuff. And so we're incredibly sensitive, right, to what the societal norms are and how we can be deemed as guilty until proven innocent, and that we automatically like feel the need to protect our children that we biologically have, but that we also have a visceral reaction when we see black children or black teens in general being targeted, right, based off of kind of that history that we've experienced. And so I noted that even in myself, just watching this, like I had some hypervigilance. I was super anxious, right? The minute the like sirens went, my heart just dropped in my chest. I was like, oh man, this is about to be bad. Now I want to preface this by saying, like, even though I knew what the series was about, like I actually don't know what happened or like why Netflix chose to create a series around it, and I'm intentionally staying ignorant of it because I want to be kind of clear when I talk about it and like have commentary on the video, and fully express all my thoughts like at the end, without knowing like what the results were. Although I must say, like once they got arrested, I was like, oh right, they're about to be charged and they're gonna be found guilty. So like that piece I wasn't surprised about, even though it broke my heart, especially because they were young boys who were crying. They like didn't have their parents there, and when their parents finally got there, the like sense of relief that they had and like feeling safe with their parents, particularly their mothers. I think only 2 of the boys had fathers who were around, who were available. One was absent, like not absent, but I will talk about that a little bit later. Something I noticed with Antron's dad, actually I'll get into it now. He, kind of distanced himself once his son got arrested. He was the one who was like kind of bullying his child, like just tell them what they want to hear, like everything will be okay. And then he told them what they wanted to hear and everything wasn't okay. So he had his own guilt around that. I don't know if he had ever gone to jail, but it sounds like he had his own brush with the law and like trouble with police and maybe jail and like incarceration. And so he was coming from like this protective space, like he wanted to protect his son, but also he wanted to protect his own feelings, his own discomfort, his own anxiety, right, his own guilt, his own shame. And in doing that, he kind of distanced himself from his family, but that only served to kind of like make his son feel rejected and like he wasn't loved. But his mother was there, and so she was the one who was like telling him out. She would always stand by his side, and she was able to like label her feelings and his feelings. And I thought that was really beautiful in such a tragic instance. And so like just kind of had me thinking a lot about that multi-generational trauma and that attachment piece, on how you have to, as a minority in this country, both gear your child, right, for a world that is hostile, and that a lot of the behaviors that maybe people in the larger majority, I'm gonna call it out, but like most white people, like y'all don't understand like why black people speak the way they do or interact with their children in the way they do, because we're coming from this simultaneous need of like, we got to protect you from the world at large who is hostile and doesn't see your beauty or your value in any way. It's automatically going to assume that you're guilty just by the color of your skin. I mean, for the love of God, this woman kept calling them animals, right? These like, they're children, and she's like, oh, the animals, so like, and Dr. Joy Degruy talks about like cognitive dissonance. And so in order to like treat somebody in this harsh way, you have to have some cognitive dissonance by degrading them, by making them seem like they're not human, in order to kind of justify the way you're treating them. So that was like an example of that was going on in this video. And so in order to kind of gear our children for a world that's like that, we might be protective over our own feelings. We might say certain things or be really harsh or not openly show our love or affection because we're afraid, right? We're afraid that they could be lost. I mean, coming from watching this video, the parents' biggest concern was not them going to jail, but like them not being alive, right? So like, what kind of trauma do you have where you'd rather your child be in jail than be dead, right? Like that, I mean, again, like that's your options, right? It was never like, well, we're gonna fight and hope that you're innocent. It's sort of like, you've already got busted, like you might as well just do the time because they don't see you any other way anyway, right? Like that's the place that they were coming from, and how heartbreaking that is for these families. Other things that I found kind of interesting throughout the video too were like the way that language was used. Yeah, calling these youths animals, right? Dehumanizing them, promoting that cognitive dissonance, but also using language like this gang of boys instead of like a group of boys. If you say gang and you say African American, you automatically like picture a certain image of what this person looks like and like what their behavior is, right? And so how language causes, or like certain language conjures up certain images, and then from that you base your beliefs, you base your values, you base your judgments on that, whether or not it's true or not, right? Because it's coming from your own stereotype, your own kind of biases. Other commentary kind of about language was the female prosecutor had called them thugs, and again, like what image comes to mind if somebody says thug, right? You're not picturing like a sweet little boy who plays the trumpet, which one of them was. He was a kind boy, never gone into any trouble. He played the trumpet. You wouldn't think that when you were watching it, right? You would think like some guy with a gun out there harming, you know, innocent women and children, basically. That's the image that comes up when you say the word thug. So again, this is cognitive dissonance, right? Dehumanizing someone so you can justify the way that you're treating them. Also, they showed instances of the police officers physically putting their hands on the children. In some cases, yes, I'm calling them children. Some of them are 14, some of them 15, some of them 16. Sorry, they're children. You can also call them teenagers if that makes you feel better. But the point is that there's a huge power dynamic. So some were overt, where like right at the opening credits, one of the boys got socked in the face, right? The officer just bashed him in his face. He had a huge bruise on his face, right? So of course he's going to be terrified. You just assaulted this 14-year-old small child. You're a big police officer with weapons. Now you bring him into the station. No parents there. Nobody who's there who's loving, safe, supportive in any way. He's under threat. His heart is beating faster. He's sweating, right? Stress response system is kicked in and is going, okay, gotta protect this kid. I'm just gonna go, like, all this top part that I've talked about, right, that is still developing anyway, is completely shut off. He's just going to go in and do what they say to make everything stop. So I'm assuming he did a little bit of dissociation. And one of the things that's hard for people to understand when they look at dissociation is they feel like, okay, well, they're talking, they're clear as day, like they're responding, so they know what's going on. And no, it's not like that. Like, people who are in a dissociative state, yeah, they are moving, they're talking, you know, things seem normal. But if you look carefully, like, there might be some stuttering, there might be kind of like some fogginess. They're not actually responding in a way that they would typically respond because they don't have access to that top part of their brain. And that was so clear in watching this video, watching this series, watching how the young boy was responding. It was Antron in particular. And then when his father came in and was like, just tell them what to say, tell them whatever they want so we can leave. He's like, well, I trust my dad and I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to go along with everything just to make this end. Again, trying to make the fearful state, the person who's in power, make them go away, make the fear, make the pain end. I'm just going to say, do whatever you tell me to do. Literally, like, and it's so interesting because, like, if a woman is being sexually assaulted and she, you know, recounts like, oh, you know, she had just laid there, she just kind of went along with the person said, we accept that, right? We're like, yeah, that makes sense. You were so scared. You know, what else could you do? But like in this instance, are you looking at these same boys thinking that same thing? Like, well, no, of course they're going to say, do what the police say. Like, they're terrified. They don't want to die. They don't know what's going to happen. No, you're like, oh, see, they're guilty because they said they did what they, you know, they said that they did it. Hello, the police had video. You know, we're so quick to just say, to brush off like these boys' behavior and call them guilty without looking at, this is exactly what dissociation looks like. This is exactly what happens when somebody's in that fearful state and that stress response system kicks in. There's no access to that top part that's like able to weigh pros and cons. It's just going on instinct. It's going on survival. Okay, what's going to keep me alive? What's going to keep me alive? What's going to keep me alive? Have his dad jump in there and also say that. It's like, that's somebody I trust. Why would they steer me in the wrong direction? Well, they steered you in the wrong direction because they don't know any better. They're coming from their own trauma, right? They're coming from their own experience. I had a lot of notes when I was watching these first 2 episodes, and I think that was because it was so plain to me how much of what was happening was just traumatizing these poor youths, and like looking at them and seeing their poor stress, like seeing their little stress response systems all activated, and like the different ways in which that they all pretty much were coming from a kind of dissociative, fearful place, right, where they just wanted it all to end. Something else that I thought was just so poignant is that one of the views, I'm sorry, I don't know which one of them was, he was on the stand and they were like, the prosecutor was saying, you know, read your statement, and he was like, I can't read. He basically shouted over and over again like he couldn't read. And something that is of note when you think about kind of like trauma and brain development is that, so take a little step back. With brain development, you know, there's like a typical kind of way that our brain develops, and you know, each foundational block has another block that's like built upon that based on like what's underneath. And so if you are, you know, overly stressed, or your stress response system is chronically being deployed, then the parts that are going to be more developed will be the parts that you use as a result of like constantly being stressed. And if you live in more of like a calm environment, your stress response system isn't constantly being activated and triggered, right, then your brain will develop in a more typical fashion where, you know, maybe reading, math, you know, all of those things, it can be kind of more expressed because you're not missing out on information. One of the things that people like me who work with survivors of complex trauma, especially repeated traumas in childhood, what we'll notice is that children might have kind of gaps in their brain development, and it's not because they're like stupid or something's wrong with them or anything like that, but it's that when you are constantly kind of hyper vigilant, you know, looking for threats in your environment, and that's what gets developed, you are going to miss out on certain opportunities and certain kind of learning skills because your attention's been diverted elsewhere, if that makes sense. So we'll see this with kids in school where, you know, it's most, you know, we see it most notably like in math, because math, you know, you kind of need to know some basics in order to learn more advanced skills. Reading, you can kind of fudge things along, but even that, like if you don't have that foundation, right, because of some repeated trauma, or maybe you have like a learning disability, right, that is irrespective of the trauma, either way, right, if you have any type of learning gap or learning disability, right, you're going to struggle with reading, or you're going to struggle with math, or you're going to struggle in school. And so the prosecutor had one of these youths on trying to like read this letter, and he was like, I can't read. And he said it like 3 or 4 different times, like, I can't read it. And they kept like badgering him. Why don't you go to school? And I'm like, I was getting so frustrated as a therapist watching this, because I'm like, this is so what I see with my clients who've experienced complex trauma. They would rather, right, miss out on school, not go to school because teachers might call on them and they don't know the answer, or they can't read very well, and it's embarrassing, it's humiliating. Like nobody wants to sit there and be like ridiculed or teased, so they avoid school. And because they miss out on school, they never get the ability to, like, they don't get help from it, so they can't learn, you know, to improve that skill, right? And so they just continue to miss out and miss out and miss out. And so rather than this person like, you know, being like, realizing, oh crap, this kid can't read, like, hello, that should have been like a red flag if you're somebody on the jury. Like, he can't even read what he wrote. Chances are, if he can't read it, he also didn't write it, right? He doesn't even know what they were saying, and they were using some words, and he was like, wait, what are you talking about? Like, he didn't even understand what they were saying. Again, this could be because he has some type of learning disability. It could be early trauma that's impeded his learning. We don't know. They didn't get into it. But it's not uncommon to see kids who have experienced trauma or have some type of learning disability, right, miss out on school and not go to school because they don't want to face the rejection or the humiliation from their peers. And that's a huge deal when you are it used to be, we used to think about it more for like the teenager years, like 12, 13 and above, where, you know, peers were like this huge deal. But it's coming on earlier and earlier. We're like 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds are like feeling the peer pressure now. But it's a huge part of development, is like acceptance from your peers. And so if your peers are ridiculing you, are teasing you, or are making you feel like you don't belong, right? What is like something that we all need? We all need connection. We're wired for self-protection, and we're wired for connection, right? Protection and connection. That's like the two basic drives of being a human. If you are already feeling kind of threatened or unsafe, and then you also don't have any type of connection, then you're lost, right? No one wants to feel lost. So that was just something I noticed that was going on. And as a trauma therapist, I'm like, oh my God, you're just traumatizing this poor child. He's like freaking out. They all freaked out during various parts of episodes 1 and 2, and it was very understandable. And it just, for me, highlighted so much of what trauma looks like, what these youths were experiencing. If they didn't already, I mean, I could already see like the multi-generational trauma aspect from their parents being fearful of their children being called in and being at the police station, like the panic that the parents felt, their desire to protect their children, the fear that they had themselves, you know, them being on guard, them even doing some kind of like avoidance because they were feeling discomfort and fear and anxiety and all that. But then seeing these boys like being chased down by the police, and the fear that they had, right? Being alone with these police officers for hours. One boy was, I think it was 24 hours before his mom got there, right? And he's like 16 years old. He's a little boy. How scary is that for him, right? And now they're going through trial, and people saying things about them, and they have to go to jail. You know, they're in jail and just bombarded. Like all of that cortisol, there's poor stress response systems, hot, you know, overactive, and now they're found guilty, right? Their, you know, worst nightmares. So I'm ready to watch part 2, where now we get to see them after they've been in jail, their, you know, adult lives. I have no idea what the next 2 episodes are going to be about, but I'm going to watch them, and I will also share my commentary on that, and hopefully tie this all together so it's nice and neat. But I just wanted to share my thoughts on the first 2 episodes because I thought they were really good. I had a lot of feelings about it. I think it spoke a lot about trauma and attachment, and just like I want to also stress something that I forgot was like one of the boys, I think it was either Kevin or Anton's mom, I don't remember, sorry, I'm not so good with names. Anyway, his mom was saying, you know, like, I got your back, I love you, like, I'll always be here. And one thing to think about with trauma is, you know, not everybody who's experienced a trauma is going to develop trauma symptoms or like a PTSD. They might have some symptoms, but like a full-blown PTSD diagnosis they might not develop. And one of those is what we call like that relational buffer. So if they have positive, secure, nurturing, loving relationships with the adults in their lives, I'm talking about children, that serves as like a buffer so that they can kind of get through whatever traumatic event, like the impacts of what happened, because they have that secure space. For people who develop kind of like lifelong trouble with trauma or PTSD, they typically don't have that relational buffer. There's something missing, right, within their attachment system, or, you know, no safe or supportive adults. And so be very curious to see kind of in the next 2 episodes how each individual's response is going to be to being in jail and being falsely accused and all of that. So that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you liked this video. Comment down below if you have seen When They See Us, what your thoughts were, what came up for you if you watched it, what you think about my synopsis of it. Check out Dr. Joy Degruy, link down below in the description box. Also a blog I wrote about multi-generational trauma and attachment. And then you can also check out my friend Narissa Harris Brooks' channel, Bloom Into Your Best Self. If you want to learn more about kind of culture, specifically like African American culture, I highly recommend that if you are in the helping profession and you're working with clients who are Black / African American, however someone defines themselves, just to be more culturally competent and have some understanding about what our experiences are, so you're not doing more harm. Stay tuned for part 2. I'll be watching the next 2 episodes and creating a video, you know, within the next week about it. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.